It has taken the world by storm, appearing in nearly every facet of social media. And given the numerous box office records it broke in its opening weekend, it's safe to say that the production's advertising efforts paid off. With the sheer difference in attention it has received for a horror film, I think we can trust that people find clowns intriguing. But the film's success isn't what we'll be exploring this time. I think what people find most refreshing about this film is how different it is to the original 90s miniseries, and given that they're from completely different times, I don't think it's fair to compare the two. However, I must say that the new adaptation of It did have a lot of very creative scenes that made great use of Pennywise's character and his relation to each member of the Losers Club. It used scares more adapted to a modern time period with relatable scenarios, especially with regards to certain pieces of technology. The creature known as It is a shapeshifter. It feeds on fear and uses this shapeshifting ability to its advantage, appearing to each member of the Losers Club as their own personal demon to draw out that fear. So in today's Darkology, we'll be exploring each character's interaction with it and what psychological fears they play into. Just what is it about these scenes that makes them so scary? Before we begin, I'd like to point out that this video will delve into several specific phobias recognized by the internet. This does not mean that they should be self-diagnosed if their symptoms happen to match up with your experiences. If you feel that you suffer from a disorder, please seek a psychiatric professional. As you might have guessed, this video will contain spoilers from 2017's It. Today, we talk about Mike, Stan, and Ben. When we're introduced to Mike, he's being asked to put down an animal at his grandfather's farm. Bolt gun in hand, he's sweating, unable to pull the trigger. Frustrated, his grandfather takes the gun and shoots the sheep himself. That Mike can't bring himself to kill shows how gentle and innocent he is. His grandpa tells him, "You need to start taking more responsibility around here. There are two places you can be in this world. You can be out here like us, or you can be in there like them. You waste time hemming and hawing, and someone else is going to make that choice for you. Except, you won't know it until you feel that bolt between your eyes." A thought that can be converted into the fight or flight response, a physiological reaction that occurs in response to a perceived harmful event, attack, or threat to survival. His apprehension in the face of a tough decision is a weakness that he must deal with. We later cut to Mike riding his bike into town. He's to make a delivery to the local butcher shop. After parking his bike, he begins to unload when he notices Henry Bowers, the local bully, and his friends driving in his direction. In a moment of a perceived threat to his survival, he instinctively decides to run into the nearby alleyway and hide behind some boxes. The creature known as It exists to devour, and it relishes the taste of fear most. It can be speculated that this immediate sensation of fear Mike experiences is what catches its attention and draws Pennywise out to harass him. Bowers' gang drives past, and relieved, Mike walks his bike over to the back door of the meat shop to make his delivery there, where he won't be seen. Mike is startled when burnt hands start clawing out from behind the back door, whispering his name and screaming for help. He stares at it in awe, cautiously walking closer to it, possibly because he's reminded of the house fire his parents died in, an altered fact from the book, something he might feel guilt over since he survived. Is he seeing a vision of the Black Spot incident of '62? Is he seeing a vision of his parents dying? Or are new people dying in front of him now? He slightly extends his arms out, and it's clear that he wants to help, but is also scared for his own safety. He motions towards the door, but backs away again, clearly struggling with the dilemma of whether to help or not. Once again, the choice is taken out of his hands when the screams suddenly stop and the door swings open, where he sees Pennywise hanging from a meat locker in the shop's freezer, laughing maniacally at his trauma. He starts to slowly back away with one foot behind the other. It's only then, when he sees the obscured outline of the clown waving at him with horrible glowing eyes, that he's completely frozen in his tracks, petrified with fear. Mike is faced with another dilemma. The strange monster in the meat locker sees him, and instead of running or taking action, he just stares at Pennywise in horror. Because of this, he's nearly caught off guard when Bowers and his gang suddenly zoom down the alleyway and nearly run him over. This goes back to what his grandfather had said to him earlier. and due to his apprehension, he was almost killed. Mike's situation is relatable. We've all been faced with difficult, high-pressure decisions, especially the dilemma of facing your fears head-on. And afterwards, we sometimes wonder if we made the right decision. Mike in this version doesn't know how it would have turned out had he tried to help his parents. All he knows is that the last memory he has of his parents is how they tried to reach him during the fire, pushing and pounding on the door, trying to escape in vain. He's traumatized from the vision of their skin having melted down to the bone. What makes this scene chilling are the screams of the people burning, and how this is something that the gentle Mike experienced for real in the deaths of his parents. They didn't just die, they suffered violently. So, what fears does Mike represent? Mike represents the fear of responsibility. The internet term for this is called hypengophobia. It's theorized to originate from a real-life trauma that involved responsibility, and goes on to consistently affect the individuals in any other events that are associated with assuming responsibility. It's described that a hypengophobic person can experience anxiety and emotional turmoil that's completely disruptive to their skill to function, a crippling nervousness. Mike also represents the fear of fire, or pyrophobia, due to the very same traumatic experience. When put in a situation involving a vision of people in a burning building, all he could do was watch in horror. When we see Stan first encounter it, he's been asked by his father to put a book away in his office. Stan's fear comes in the form of a creepy painting of a crooked woman holding a flute in that room. From the way Stan immediately shields the left side of his face from peripheral vision upon entering the room, it's clear that this is something Stan is already aware of and deeply afraid of. This is something many of us have done. Growing up, we've all had objects in our homes that frightened us as children. It's a very relatable, albeit irrational fear. What movies like It do is show us that they're not so irrational. Take the clown doll from Poltergeist, for example. Stan slowly turns toward the painting and notices that it's slightly crooked. He goes to straighten it, perhaps to make it seem less creepy. He turns his back to it and it falls to the floor with a loud thud, causing his shoulders to jolt up in surprise. At this point, he's already unsettled, not only because he dislikes the painting, but because his father's office is very dimly lit, leaving pockets of shadow and uncertainty everywhere. Despite this, he takes a deep breath and walks over to it, almost as if telling himself that there's nothing to fear, that it's just his imagination. This is something a lot of us have experienced as well, that denial in the face of unexplainable happenings and an ominous presence. Placing the portrait back up, he's shocked to see that the woman is no longer in the painting, and at that moment, the sound of a flute is heard, playing from somewhere in the room. He turns around to see the twisted woman from the portrait appear from the shadows, baring her sharp teeth in a crooked and sinister smile. He flees in sheer screaming terror, shutting the door behind him. What makes this scene work so well is how it plays on several different fears. First, we have the woman in the painting. Portraits in general can often be seen as creepy because a lot of them are drawn with those eyes that follow you no matter where you're standing. This plays on the fear of being stared at, or scopophobia. On top of that, the woman is twisted in an almost uncanny way, like it isn't just a portrait of a regular human being, but something more. In a Q&A, director Andy Muschietti mentioned that the inspiration for the woman in the painting came from the work of Amedeo Modigliani. Muschietti added that the villain in his previous film, Mama, was also inspired from these paintings, and when we look at Modigliani's work, it's easy to see why. There's a haunting, uncanny element about them. The fact that it takes place inside a synagogue, a place of spiritual worship, might also place one in the mindset of a person with phasmophobia, the fear of ghosts or spirits. Churches are generally places that most people don't prefer to be in alone. Then we finally have nyctophobia, the fear of darkness. It's a fear that stems from the brain's disfigured perception of what would or could happen in a dark environment. Fear of the dark can also take hold if the mind is unsteady, scared about recent events or ideas, or perceives a threat. Now, it's not necessarily the case that Stan suffers from any of these, as he's clearly able to manage putting the book back and even fixing the portrait's placement twice. However, the scene does toy with these fears, and as with the case of nyctophobia, what could be waiting in the dark, waiting to strike. During Ben's first encounter with it, we find him reading about Derry's history at the town library, where he spends his free time. When one of the librarians asks him if he has any friends, he rolls his eyes in annoyance. It's implied that, since he doesn't have any friends, coupled with how the town bully has targeted him, This is his safe space, where he can read in peace. Two things come to mind when looking at his character's struggles. The first is coulrophobia, the fear of being laughed at, a social anxiety that can have associations with being bullied. The next is monophobia, the fear of being alone or isolated. Now again, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say that Ben suffers from either of these phobias, as he seems to function pretty typically. It's more so that he represents these issues, being the new kid on the block. And what's scary about this scene is that it takes place in a safe space. Flipping through the pages of A History of Old Derry, he sees various photos taken of the town where, in one of them, a boy is staring back at the camera playfully. He soon learns of an Easter event when an explosion killed 88 children and 14 adults, and as he continues to flip through the pages, we notice one of the old librarians standing behind him in the distance, just out of focus, hunched over and smiling sinisterly. People typically smile in response to something that makes them happy. There's something creepy about a misplaced smile. It's got an insidious nature to it. Ben doesn't see it, but we the viewers do, and it's very unsettling. What's brilliant about the subtlety of this scene in the background is it's never really explained. A few cuts later, she's back to organizing books in the back. Was this just another one of It's forms? Was the old librarian a creep? It's the uncertainty that messes with us. Ben comes upon the photo of a tree, taken at the site of the explosion. The subsequent pages are of the same image, only they are increasingly closer to the tree. With each turn of the page, the tension for what might come next rises. He begins to frantically page through what has now become a creepy flipbook animation until at last, he flips to an extreme close-up of one of the tree's branches whereupon rests the disembodied head of the boy he saw earlier. The way this scene is presented, it's almost like a bad omen. A person might think that they were hallucinating. He slams the book closed, then notices a red balloon floating into the room behind him. Following it, he sees a burnt Easter egg standing upright on the floor, and then another one. They form a trail leading down to the dark, empty archive room below. Once he gets there, the light starts to flicker and he notices a dark figure run past one of the bookshelves. To some, electrical disturbances are thought to be a sign of paranormal activity. They are often used in horror films to create an unsettling effect. Science explains that these occurrences in real life are likely the result of disturbances in the Earth's magnetic field, due to solar winds hitting certain areas differently. Some even theorize that these strong fluctuations in the magnetic field might affect the human brain, causing dizziness and hallucinations. However, in this context, that probably isn't the case. Ben turns towards the stairs where, at the upper landing, the dark figure has reappeared, its head obscured by the doorframe. Ben hides behind one of the bookshelves, watching as it jolts step by step down the flight of stairs in a jerky manner. As it gets closer, Ben realizes it's the burned and headless body of the boy from the photo. It suddenly paces after him in stiff, disjointed movements as the lights continue to flicker. A voice calls after him, and he turns around, only to see a clown now chasing him. This is a scene that borrows from the concept of the uncanny valley, when we both recognize something as familiar and yet instinctively recognize it as not belonging. The corpse from the book should hardly have a physical form by now, yet there it is, and it's moving. The jerky way the headless corpse shambles down the stairs is unsettling, like it's forgotten how to move properly after being dead for so long. It moves dreadfully slow at first, and stops for a tense moment, only to suddenly pace frantically in Ben's direction. Finally, the concept of something scary coming out of a piece of media is a rather chilling form of terror. We tend to think of inanimate objects like photographs as safe. We typically don't expect the ghost in the TV to step out of the TV. It shatters our expectations of what is real and what we can trust as safe. It causes an uncertainty that can quickly become something else. Fear. In the next few videos, we'll be exploring the fears of more characters from the Losers Club and It 2017, so be sure to hit the bell icon to be notified when they come out. My name is Bluelavasix, and as always, thanks for watching. Did you like that video? If you did, be sure to leave a like and comment below what your favorite scene from It 2017 was.